My warm French apple charlotte is a classic and one of the most popular styles. I start the recipe off by making the apple filling. I sliced up 6 apples and I've just been slow cooking them on low heat in a 1/4 cup of butter. You know, an apple charlotte is really very much like an apple pie, except that you don't have to make the pie crust. But what you do have to do is cook the apple filling so that the moisture from the apples doesn't soak the bread that's on the outside of the charlotte. I love adding orange zest to my apple charlotte. It does set it apart from an apple pie. Cut my orange in half so I can add the juice. I put in a 1/4 cup of sugar. This time I'm using apricot jam, adding a 1/4 cup. Now I'll just stir this a couple minutes more until the apricot jam has melted into the apples. Now it's time for the outside of the charlotte, which is toasted bread. To get the pan ready, and I generously buttered the bottom and sides, because basically you're buttering the toast as it's toasting for the outside, adding more flavor and richness. Now the choice of bread I find is important in this recipe. I do want to add a little richness, so I'm using an egg bread. I cut 3 different shapes out of my bread to line the mold. Nice little round for the center of the bottom of the pan. Then I need to make almost ladyfinger size slices to line the sides of the pan. Then to create a nice little fan pattern in the bottom, I'll cut these slices in half and then create little triangles. You'll see my logic in just a minute. I'll drop the circle right in the center and then put my triangle points into the center. You can really squish the bread down. You don't want any gaps, so feel free to overlap, because if you have gaps, that's where the apple filling might leak out. I use these ladyfinger style slices and press them on the side. This really is a beautiful recipe, especially if you've never made an apple pie before and don't feel like tackling pastry. Well, a loaf of day-old bread and some apples, and you've got an elegant dessert. All right, now I'm going to save these pieces for the top. Now it's time to fill the charlotte. The apples are still a little warm, but that's okay. And just like when I added the berries to my individual summer berry puddings, you want to press down the apples. Now, I don't want to top this with my remaining bread at this point. So what I do first, put a piece of parchment right on the surface of the apples. And then, if you have bread that's hanging over the edges so it doesn't over-toast, you can put a little foil just on the outside. This is what my grandmother used to do to her apple pie crusts. So when you're making a charlotte, the same applies. So I bake the charlotte just like this at 375 for 30 minutes. That really cooks down the apples. And after 30 minutes in the oven, what I do is just drop in my whole slice of bread and any little scraps you might have left. Any exposed bread that's kind of toasted around the edges, I fold in. So I'm not done with this yet. It has to go back in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes, still at 375, and I'm just watching for that top layer to be toasted. And here it is, not hot from the oven, but actually cooled 90 minutes. You might be tempted to turn it out of the charlotte mold before the 90 minutes, but believe me, I've learned the hard way. Unless you want a mess on your plate, let it sit. So there is your apple charlotte. Cut a nice wedge. And there it is. It really is like apple pie without the fuss of making pastry at all. This is what charlotte is all about.